John Denver was a big star in folk and country music. He was known for writing songs with beautiful melodies and deep words. But on a normal October day, something scary would happen in his life. Imagine being in the pilot's seat of a small private plane flying high above a beautiful scenery. John Denver, who sang hits like Take Me Home, Country Roads, was in charge. The thing that drove him to new heights was his love of flying. But something very bad happened in those last few scary minutes. Welcome to our trip through the amazing life of John Denver. It's a story of music, adventure, and a journey that would shock the music world. Please subscribe if you like this content. Henry John Deutschendorf Jr. was John Denver's real name when he was born on December 31st, 1943. He got the Jr. in his name to honor his father, Henry Deutschendorf Sr., who was a pilot in the U.S. Air Force and also taught people how to fly. Families in the Air Force often have to move around a lot. They lived in New Mexico, Oklahoma, Arizona, and Alabama before settling down in Fort Worth, Texas. John was very shy as a child, and moving around a lot made it hard for him to make friends that would last. The best times of his life were on the farm his grandmother owned in Oklahoma, where he heard old-time country music. A turning point came when he was 11, his other grandma gave him an old Gibson guitar. John found a way to connect with other people through music. Singing along while playing the guitar seemed to be the best way to get people's attention. His high school years were rough, and by his junior year, he did something brave. He ran away to California because he really wanted to be a singer. Sadly, this adventure had to end because his father, who was a pilot, stepped in. John had to go back to high school and finish, even after this delay. John went to Texas Tech in Lubbock to study design after he graduated from high school. He joined a group of singers called the Alpine Trio during this time because he was still interested in music. He learned that he was really good at making music after this, and it set him on the path to becoming a famous artist. John quit college and set his sights on Los Angeles to fully engage himself in the world of music. He was getting better, booking gigs, and singing in local clubs. Peter, Paul, and Mary is a folk band. Have you ever heard their song Leaving on a Jet Plane? John wrote it, though. It's interesting that he wrote this song during a break when he was feeling very alone. He loved music and flying, but airplanes were especially important to him because he loved both of them so much. John became very famous in the music business after Leaving on a Jet Plane became a hit. Studios liked how good-looking he looked, and directors from those studios persuaded John to change his last name so that his brand would be easier to remember. His stage name comes from the beautiful capital city of his favorite state, Colorado. John and his family moved to Colorado later in life, and many of his songs were inspired by his love of the beautiful Rocky Mountains. The name Denver helped him a lot. From the late 1960s to the mid-1970s, John Denver put out 6 records. 4 of them were big hits. His number 1 hits were Take Me Home, Country Roads, Annie's Song, and Thank God I'm a Country Boy. In fact, his song Rocky Mountain High became the state song of Colorado, making him even more famous in the Centennial State. John was a real explorer who was always excited to see the world's wonders. His dad taught him how to fly, which made him want to try new things. By the middle of the 1970s, John had become a skilled private pilot, having earned licenses for single-engine land, single-engine sea, and multi-engine land planes. He was even taught to fly a jet plane so he could use it to get to his concerts. His skills included flying gliders and jet planes. He racked up an impressive amount of over 2,700 hours of flight time over the years. John's best years were without a doubt the 1970s. He made and released about 300 songs during this time, and 33 million records were sold around the world. He even appeared in movies and TV shows, showing off all of his different skills. The 1980s, on the other hand, were bad years for John's business. Even though he kept performing, he turned his attention to politics. With the song Whose Garden Was This by Tom Paxton, he was one of the first singers to use music to send messages about the environment. Beginning with this song, he made a string of songs to bring attention to environmental problems. John loved the wild, empty places of the American West, but he was also interested in the frontiers that not many people had been to. His interest went beyond the limits of Earth and led him to follow a unique hobby in space. He was so excited about exploring space that he took and passed NASA's test to see if he was mentally and physically ready to go to space. Because of his skills, John became one of the best candidates to be the first civilian to go into space on the spaceship Challenger. He was really excited about writing a song in space. But things went badly when he was turned down to join the mission. In a strange way, this would save his life in the end because the Challenger ship exploded in 1986 while taking off. John's close friends often said that he was afraid of nothing, especially when it came to flying. He was very interested in aerobatics and glider flying. To show how good he was, he would often turn off the engine of his plane about 35 miles from Aspen and slide it in safely. Among the planes he owned were a Crescent Eagle and a couple of Cessna 210s. But in 1997, John Denver was looking for a new thrill, and that's how he found the Long Easy, a famous home-built plane. This plane was built in 1987 by a builder in Texas, and it had a unique change made to it. Over the pilot's left shoulder was the fuel selection valve, which is an important part that sends fuel from different tanks to the engine. This change made it possible for the plane to keep flying without stopping to refuel. John found the plane for sale and knew he had to have it. He got in touch with the owner. It was love at first look. He was told by the owner that the plane was in great shape and there were no mechanical issues to think about. A meeting was set up so that they could test fly it. John finished the deal on September 27, 1997, and paid $56,000 for the plane. He had big plans for it, like giving it a new coat of paint and the registration number N555JD. John kept on touring while the plane got a change at an aircraft paint shop. His last show was in Corpus Christi, Texas, on October 5, 1997. He looked alive and full of energy, and his show was nothing less than amazing. He had no idea what was going to happen to him. This past Saturday, October 11, 1997, John went to the paint shop with the same flight teacher. After taking off in the plane, the teacher did a full check that took about 30 minutes and included 2 touch-and-go landings and some slow flight maneuvers. They also looked over the plane systems, giving close attention to where the fuel selector valve was placed. John was ready to fly after the teacher gave it the thumbs up. John went to play golf with some friends the next day, on October 12th. Even though they told him to stay for another round, John couldn't hold back his excitement to fly his new toy. His outfit was green pants, a bright sweater, and cowboy boots. He got to Monterey Peninsula Airport in Monterey, California. With clear skies and light winds, it was a great day to fly. While doing his pre-flight check, he wasn't happy with where the fuel selector button was placed. He had already begun the process of moving it back to where it belonged. He said it was a little hard to get there, but he was going to set the autopilot before going back to switch tanks. Around 5 p.m., John called ground control and got permission to move. The right wing had less than half a tank of fuel and the left wing had less than a quarter of a tank. At 5:12 p.m., he was given permission to practice 3 touch-and-go landings. This is a move where the plane hits the runway for a short time before taking off again. Everything looked fine. He asked to leave the routine and fly around the area at 5:27 p.m. Tower agreed to this, but he asked him to check a 4-digit code. They asked him to reset his transmitter when they couldn't figure out who he was. "Do you have it now?" John inquired. It became clear very quickly that those were John's last words. The next minute, at 5:28 p.m. Pacific time, something very bad happened. The plane suddenly fell sharply toward the Pacific Ocean, not far from Pacific Grove, California. It had been flying normally just moments before. From the ground, people saw the plane about 500 feet above them as it suddenly tipped sharply to the right and fell straight into the ocean. Some of these people who saw the plane go down also heard a strange sound, like a pop or backfire, coming from the engine. No one had time to do anything because the plane was so low. The rubble was mostly found about 30 feet below the surface, which matches what the witnesses said. The plane's front was badly damaged, which means it had a nosedive hit. The autopsy report showed that John had been hit several times with hard objects. It was too dangerous to survive this crash. Just 3 minutes after the plane hit the water, search and rescue teams were already at the scene of the crash. But it would take them all night to get all of John Denver's big body parts out of the water, which was about 25 feet deep. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, started a probe right away after the crash to find out what went wrong. As they looked for answers, they went down a number of possible tracks. First, it turned out that John had had some problems in the past that kept him from getting the medical clearance he needed to fly. When he got caught driving drunk in 1993, he got in trouble with the state. The judge was pretty easy on him, which was lucky for him. John pleaded guilty and was given probation and a $372 fine. But he got into trouble again the next year when he crashed his Porsche into some trees while drunk. Over time, it became clear that John had been having problems with drugs. It was even said that the idea for Rocky Mountain High came from LSD and weed. In 1994, he was already having a bad time when his Kristen Eagle plane crashed into a Cessna at an intersection of runways in Jackson Hole. These events painted a picture of a man who was having problems with drinking. When John saw his doctor in 1995, he said that he had 2 to 4 drinks a week when he was traveling. No cases of alcohol abuse were recorded. But because he had been in trouble with the law before and didn't follow certain rules, the FAA no longer thought he was physically fit to fly. In March 1997, the FAA sent him a certified letter telling him that their system had taken away his medical license. In spite of this, he kept flying. It's still not clear why John disobeyed, but it could have something to do with his reckless personality and his love of taking risks. However, the blood tests done after the crash showed that he did not have any drugs or alcohol in his system. The NTSB finally came to the conclusion that John's deadly distraction was the fuel selector valve's inconvenient placement, which took his attention away from flying. They thought that John's plane crashed because he couldn't reach the handle and accidentally steered it into a nosedive. Other pilots who knew this long, easy plane and had flown it said that to change the fuel selection. It was even mentioned by 2 pilots that they had accidentally drained a fuel tank, which almost caused a disaster because the fuel choice and gauge that shows how much fuel is left in the tank were in very inconvenient places. In fact, when NTSB investigators actually got into a long easy to try out these maneuvers, they noticed that they often accidentally pressed the right rudder pedal with their right foot while turning. This shows just how tricky the whole process was. Also, the police found that John hadn't refueled the plane before it took off. He wouldn't have had to use the valve to switch fuel tanks in the middle of the flight if he had filled up the main tank first. It's interesting that John also didn't file a flight plan. Instead, he just told the mechanic that he didn't need to add fuel because he only planned to be in the air for an hour. He was sorry, but he couldn't have known that flight would not bring him back. Sad to say, John's life was cut short at the age of 53. However, John Denver's death did not change his impact, which lives on more than 20 years later. There is a beautiful metal statue in the middle of Denver, Colorado. It is on the grounds of Red Rocks Amphitheater, which is where the Colorado Music Hall of Fame is located. The statue is 15 feet tall and shows John as an environmental fighter, holding a guitar on his back and letting a huge eagle sit on his arm. A star was put on the famous Hollywood Walk of Fame for John Denver in October 2014. 3 of his children were there to see the star come out. Jesse, Belle, and Zachary were there. His music still has the power to touch the hearts of many people today, giving them comfort and strength.